Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. A stunning account tonight from a top official inside the Trump administration. A worst-case scenario of a government upside down, where the staff works to contain the craziness at the top. The senior official has written an anonymous op-ed in tomorrow's New York Times describing him or herself as a member of the resistance inside the Trump administration. Referring to numerous like-minded Trump officials, the administration official writes that we believe our first duty is to this country, and the president continues to act in a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. Quote, that is why many Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he's out of office. What could be the most powerful anonymous letter since American diplomat George Kennan published his historic telegram outlining the Cold War strategy of containment. But rather than attempting to contain a foreign power, the author in this case makes clear that the objective now is to contain the worst impulses of a sitting U.S. president. Quote, we are trying to do what's right even when Donald Trump won't. This isn't the work of the so-called deep state. It's the work of the steady state, close quote. Well, the op-ed also takes direct aim at President Trump, stating, among other things, that the root of the problem is the president's amorality. Anyone who works with him knows he is not moored to any discernible first principles that guide his decision-making. It says that President Trump's impulses are generally anti-trade, anti-democratic, and that Trump engages in repetitive rants. And his impulsiveness results in half-baked, ill-informed, and occasionally reckless decisions that have to be walked back. Wow. Reacting to the developing story late today, the president offered his view on Twitter, writing, quote, one word, treason. I'm joined now by Michael Schmidt, Washington correspondent for the New York Times, Zerlina Maxwell, director of progressive programming for Sirius XM Radio, Phil Rucker, White House bureau chief of the Washington Post, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney, and joining me now by phone is MSNBC political contributor Steve Schmidt. Steve, you've been on the inside of the political capsule. You know what it's like to be under somebody running the country. What is it when a top official, apparently, according to the Times, a senior administration official, has come out and said this guy is reckless, and it's only we working under him have kept him from destroying the country?
Well, Chris, it is an extraordinary and historic op-ed. They referenced John McCain at the end of it, and my first thought was to think about John McCain's stories as a prisoner of war in Vietnam and the comfort that the prisoners took when they were able to establish through the isolation of their solitary confinement communication with the other prisoners through tap code through the wall. And so the first thing I'd like to say as someone in the resistance on the outside is thank you, and it is nice to hear from you, but it is not enough. We are in an hour of national emergency in this country. That is evidenced by the president's behavior and erratic behavior that we see in public every day, by the account of this op-ed, and, of course, by Bob Woodward's book, a journalist of the highest standards and reputation who has distinguished himself over a lifetime of meticulous reporting about how the powerful act. We know that this administration is vile, corrupt, and likely criminal. We know that this president is immoral, that he is mentally and intellectually unfit for his office. What I would say back to the author of this op-ed is that this resistance inside the administration, whomever they are, must now gather. And one of them, the best of them, the toughest, the hardest, the most credible, must come forward into the light. They must take the full step, and they must tell the American people the truth, because the American people deserve to know. We are a nation of 325 million people on a planet of 6 billion. And this vile, immoral, corrupt, indecent, dangerous, intellectually unfit president is a danger to all of us. And they have an obligation to the country, to the Constitution, to every American patriot from Nathan Hale on. Nathan Hale, who said, "I regret only that I have one life to give up for my country." We're not asking them to do that. We're just asking them to come forward and tell the truth. The truth in a moment of crisis that's different than the emergency. And the crisis is the political cowardice in the country, acute in the Republican Party, where not one person will step forward and say enough is enough with his assaults on objective truth, on the rule of law, on liberal democracy. Enough is enough with his fetishizing autocratic dictators around the world, assaulting and assailing our allies. Enough. Who will step forward? That question now is foremost in my mind reading this. We need someone in the public to tell the truth.
Let me go to Phil Rocker on this, and then we're going to go to Steve Schmidt, Michael Schmidt, the straight reporters here. That passion was real. I want to get and check this out with you guys who cover the White House. Does the voice that we read in the New York Times op-ed piece that's running tomorrow, the inside top administration official who won't identify himself, apparently is a him, according to the Times in their introduction, talks about the question, here we are, the issue here. Is this a White House being kept in control by its people under the president? Are they controlling the president in a way that's saving the country as they see it? Phil Rucker of the Washington Post.
Yeah, well, Chris, the column in the New York Times is extraordinary, but it does fit the pattern that's been shown through many months of reporting, and including Bob Woodward's book about this president, about this White House, about the lengths to which senior officials around the president have gone to try to contain his impulses, to try to reverse damage that they fear he could do to the country and to national security. That is very real, and it's created a real ripple inside the West Wing this evening. People were canceling meetings and huddling behind closed doors to try to strategize about how to deal with this. The president's anger was described by a key source to my colleague Ashley Parker as volcanic this evening. He is very upset. He views this as a treasonous act of betrayal by somebody in his administration, and there is a hunt underway to find out who this individual is.
Let me go to Michael Schmidt. It seems like, the way I read it, I did follow, of course, what Michael Wolff wrote in January about this White House, the chaos within it, the failure to meet even normal standards of competence. Then we got Omarosa's book, a book basically from a fellow traveler of the reality television world who came with Trump because thanks to Trump. Then we got Bob Woodward, the best investigative reporter, coming out with this book next week. We've got pieces of this week. This article in the New York Times tomorrow, an op-ed in the op-ed page, looks to me as a confirmation of everything we've read, from working our way in from Michael Wolff to Omarosa to Bob Woodward, and now we're inside the White House, an actual high administration official saying everything you guys have been saying is true.
They're all chapters in the same book, but there's even a better example more recently, which was his tweet over the weekend. He's under investigation for obstruction of justice. He knows they are looking at his tweets. They know that Mueller's looking at his relationship with Sessions. And what does he do? He tweets about the fact that Sessions has not done his job by allowing these Republicans to get charged. And that is
the two U.S. Congress people who have been indicted, yeah.
Correct. And that runs so much in the face of obstruction of justice.
Well, he believes, because he acts like he believes, that the purpose of the Justice Department is to carry out his political will.
And he has continued to behave that way since he came to Washington, never adjusting his behavior to the norms or the laws of Washington.
Well, one of the article was written today said that the president of the United States is not a president. He's not running the United States government. He's just a guy doing his guy thing. It's just Trump being Trump. The administration official, by the way, who authored the op-ed, also says that Trump officials have considered attempts to remove him from office. Quote, given the instability many witnessed, there were early whispers within the cabinet of invoking the 25th Amendment, which would start a complex process for removing the president. But no one wanted to precipitate a constitutional crisis, so we will do what we can to steer the administration in the right direction until one way or another it's over. Joyce, that's an amazingly sepulchral comment, basically. This presidency is going to die at some point. Let's just write it out and keep it as being as least dangerous as possible.
The idea that the 25th Amendment would ever be used is really hard to contemplate that we're at that point. And it would require the vice president to part company with the president, as well as a majority of the cabinet, and for those folks to get together and to ask the Congress to sit down and consider the president's competency. So the op-ed is correct. It would trigger a constitutional crisis. Congress would have a lot of decision-making power. We can debate all day whether they would stand up and perform their function under this setting, but it would be largely unprecedented. And similarly, the president's reaction to call this treason is just a mind-boggling display of his ignorance about the constitutional basis for founding this country, because something that the founding fathers did was to reject the idea that treason involved a sovereign. And they did away with a couple hundred years of English common law and adopted this view that treason is only a citizen who provides aid or comfort to a foreign enemy, that there is no duty of loyalty owed to the sovereign in that sense of it being treasonous. So he is shooting off cylinders here, but still hard to contemplate that we're in 25th Amendment territory.
It sounds like we are. Rather than dispute, by the way, the content of the op-ed late today that will appear in the New York Times tomorrow, the president, true to form, lashed out at the Times.
When you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons, no. And the New York Times is failing. If I weren't here, I believe the New York Times probably wouldn't even exist. So if the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020 because of what we've done.
Zarlina, your analysis.
Well, in that clip, he looks sweaty and a little bit unhinged, to use Omarosa's word. But I think, as to the other guest points, this validates what we already knew from the previous books and all of the excellent reporting the Washington Post and the Times has done over the past 2 years. I think what we as citizens and as analysts and people living in this country who care about our families and our safety, what we need to decide in this moment is, what do we do next? Is it the 25th Amendment? Is it making sure that the House becomes a Democratic majority in November so that we can then perhaps even talk seriously about the possibility of starting an impeachment process, which is not a one-step process, it's a two-step process. So that would just, the beginning of that would just be talking about it in a serious way. And I think that we're actually in that moment. The president is a national security threat because he doesn't understand foreign policy. He makes brash decisions. He doesn't listen to his advisors. And we now have Bob Woodward on record saying that General Mattis essentially took an order from the president on the phone to assassinate Assad, an impulsive directive, and then hung up and said, I'm not going to do that.
What do you want the Democrats to do?
I want the Democrats to stand up and fight. I think that,
well, that's a general term. Should they promise impeachment in this election?
I don't think you promise impeachment. That's not the role of the Democratic Party. I think the Democrats can message around holding this president accountable. Impeachment is one of the ways to hold this president accountable. But it is actually up to the citizens and the voters to ensure that the Democrats have the votes necessary in order to do any of those things. So it's also on citizens.
So let's go to Phil. I think you hear then the care which with Democrats are avoiding the word impeachment, even though I think a lot of them want it. They have a passion for it. I know. I can read polls. And my question then is, what's going to likely happen? I've been talking to you guys for months now about people in the White House willing to speak to you on background. This person went a step beyond background and put out an op-ed piece for the New York Times, a direct, to me, a statement of war against the president. Now, what's the next step going to be? Are people going to rally to this Fletcher Christian character? I mean, it's a mutiny. That's what's going on. People within the White House are saying this president's sort of a Captain Queeg, to mix my metaphors. He's a little bit off it. Something's got to be done. What will be done inside the White House by the staffers? Anything?
Well, we'll see, Chris. We'll see if the staffers inside the White House are going to be able to identify who this official is. And if so, that official's probably not going to be in the job for very long. But I think there's going to be mounting public pressure for this.
Do you know who wrote this op-ed?
I have no idea who it is.
There's a lot of speculation around here, I got to tell you. Most of us I've talked to think it was somebody who can write, Somebody knows how to put an op-ed piece together, knows how to get it to the Times without any clerical assistance, without any kind of pomposity, having somebody make the phone call for him, somebody to put it online for him. No, somebody can do it him or herself. That's what I narrow it down to. What do you make of that?
I don't know who it is, Chris. I can tell you from our reporting in the last hour that the president is speculating to his confidants that it might be somebody in a national security realm, but there's no evidence yet of who the official is. Regardless, though, I think there's going to be public pressure, as Steve Schmidt was mentioning, for this official to come forward and for others in the administration who identify as part of this resistance to come forward, and perhaps that will change the outlook that the Republican leaders in Congress have had throughout this presidency, which is to sort of let him go along without being fully checked.
Well, let me get to the earmarks. The earmarks, to use lodestar is a term the vice president likes to use. His speechwriters like to use the word lodestar, an unusual vocabulary word, and it shows up in this op-ed. It also talks about morality, the lack of morality, amorality or immorality. It sort of had a sense of maybe a neocon edge to it, a sense of this president doesn't know what he's doing in terms of international strategy. I can imagine a number of motives behind this, Michael Schmidt.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see what are the things that really...
Why would somebody stick their neck out in their career out unless they really believe, A, there's ideologies being threatened, or their morality is being threatened, or the republic itself is being threatened?
But from day one, you have seen more anonymous sources talk about this presidency than any other because they were so bothered by it. You see it every day in the paper. Now you're simply seeing it in an op-ed. So is it that different? Well, it certainly has caught the public's attention, and that's the thing. What are the things that make the public?
Is there a difference between a guy or a woman talking to somebody like you or Phil on the phone, sotto voce from a nearby bar or something? Yeah, I want to put on Steve, too. Just a second. There's a jump, it seems to be, an escalation in saying, not only am I going to chat with somebody on background or deep background, I'm going to go out and put an op-ed pad that everybody's going to be able to try to figure out eventually who did it.
No, this is an escalation of it. It definitely is. But it is. We have seen this from the beginning. People have been bothered since the beginning.
Thank you so much, Michael Schmidt and Steve Schmidt before you, and Phil Rucker and the rest of the panel sticking around for the next segment tonight. What about this attack on Southerners, making fun of Southerners as stupid people? Trump, I don't believe this guy. He got elected thanks to Dixie, mainly. The Southern white people voted for him, and now you're laughing. It is really nice repayment. Dance with the one that brung you. How about mock the ones who brung you? Why is the president making fun of Dixie? Well, coming up more on today's remarkable development. As I said, a senior official in the Trump White House claiming he and his colleagues, or she, are working to thwart the president's impulses. And new revelations tonight from Bob Woodward's explosive book on the president. We're also keeping an eye on Capitol Hill, where senators are grilling Trump's Supreme Court pick, Brett Kavanaugh. There he is. This is Hardball, where the action is.
State again.
Welcome back to Hardball. We're now back with more on that historic op-ed in the New York Times coming out tomorrow from an unnamed senior Trump administration official who references, by the way, the late Senator John McCain, writing, "There is a quiet resistance within the administration of people choosing to put country first." In a statement, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders wrote, "The individual behind this piece has chosen to deceive rather than support the duly elected president of the United States." She added, "He is not putting country first, but putting himself or his ego ahead of the will of the American people. This coward should do the right thing and resign." Well, I'm back with our panel, Michael Schmidt, Zerlina, and Joyce. And joining us right now is Jonathan Allen, national political reporter for NBC News Digital. Jonathan, I want you to start, and I want Michael and everybody else back in here, because when you report this administration, report on it, it seems to me you have to make a judgment and had a reaction when you heard this top official write this op-ed. Does it sing with what you see already? Jonathan.
Yeah, and I mean, I think yesterday...
People trying to protect their country from their president.
Well, it jives with what the people in the White House who are worried about the president believe that they are doing. I mean, this is a very sort of self-serving way of looking at what they're doing. Hey, we're the American patriots standing in the breach between Donald Trump and American oblivion, and that's why we're keeping our jobs. That, you know, in tax
But in other words, their real motive is not, it's great to work in the White House.
Look, I think there are a lot of things that work. I think this is the way they justify it to themselves. And they say, look, And partly it's to work in the White House, partly because they want to justify to themselves why they're sticking around with this guy. Look at this op-ed. They talk about how they need bipartisanship, they need McCain, and then there's a laundry list of like Republican successes. It was odd. The other thing that's fascinating about this is it's a holy trinity of Trump conspiracy theories. You've got a deep state anonymous source writing an op-ed in the New York Times. I mean, there is nothing buzzier than that for the red meat crowd of Trump conspiracy theories.
Michael, when the president comes into a cabinet room like this, or he goes into the Roosevelt room with his staff people, or he's surrounded by 4 or 5 staff people, does he think they're on his side or on the side of his critics? Because when you read this letter, you say, wait a minute, maybe the people around me, Mr. President, you're thinking, they agree with this criticism of me.
Well,
does he think that?
Well, here's a good example. The president has in recent days gotten very skeptical of the FBI director, Chris Wray. This is a guy he appointed last year to replace Comey, but he's not happy with the speed to which he's doing the things he wants him to do, like look into things like Uranium One and the Clinton Foundation, and he has deep frustrations there. That is his handpicked FBI director. He mortgaged an enormous amount of his political capital to fire Comey. It backfired on him, and now he's having sour grapes because he doesn't like Wray.
Who does he like? Somebody's laughing.
Donald
It's a good
J.
question.
Trump.
Anyway, as President Trump's ire over Attorney General Jeff Sessions' recusal, of course, in the Russia investigation has raged, Sessions has become a near constant subject of Trump attacks. In his upcoming book, by the way, Fear, Bob Woodward writes that Trump vented about Sessions to former White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter. Quote, Trump tells Porter of Sessions, this guy's mentally retarded. He's this dumb Southerner. That's the president talking. In a tweet, Trump denied that account, writing, I said neither. Never use those terms on anyone, including Jeff. And being a Southerner is a great thing. Zerlina, for you, because I think you might enjoy the absurdity of this. Here's a guy that if you look at the numbers, he got enormous numbers in Alabama, Mississippi, the states with all the bad history of segregation and Jim Crow. They love Donald Trump. Louisiana, these numbers are through the roof. And it's the white Southerners, I believe, who did the voting for him. How can he now dump on, quote, dumb Southerners? It seems to me he's not dancing with the one that brung him.
That's definitely a bad political move on his part, because I think that his base is those folks that you're talking about in Alabama and Louisiana and Mississippi. And, when he's going out on the campaign trail and his rallies, which he loves so much, it's normally to those places, the places that are the most red and that contain the most members of his base, which believes in the deep state, which believes in, all of the conspiracy theories that we've been talking about for the past 2 years. And, earlier I was chuckling, Chris, because I think we're in a moment where, this just keeps getting more and more ridiculous. But at the same time, this is so incredibly dangerous in this particular moment, because everything we've learned about this president tells us that he's impulsive, that he will do things off the cuff just because he's upset in a peak. And that is dangerous when you have the launch codes, when you are the commander-in-chief of the military, when you have the entire federal government at your disposal. And so I think, as citizens, we really have to seriously ask ourselves, what do we do next? Because the president is not representing all of us. Sarah Huckabee Sanders' statement was interesting because she did not call it fake news. And she said that the person who wrote it was only caring about their ego. That sounds like Donald Trump to me. He's the one who always cares about, people saying nice things about him and about his own ego and how things affect him personally. So I think that is something, when the president is only thinking about himself and not thinking about the rest of us, who he represents and who he is supposed to be governing, that is a dangerous situation.
Joyce, I wonder who he does represent, if not the white South, to be blunt about it. This comment, dumb Southerner. First of all, I went to Chapel Hill. I was surrounded by a lot of people smarter than me, I got to tell you, especially in math. The idea of Southerners being stupid is an absurdity. And why would he use that notion generically? It's so offensive, let's put it that way, just offensive politically.
This seems to be pretty much stock in trade for Trump, though. He never seems to formulate a reasonable, calm criticism of someone's policies. Instead, he seems to jump almost immediately to this available stereotype criticism. He criticized a disabled reporter. He criticized Gold Star parents. The easy criticism of Sessions instead of having a principled disagreement with him, which would be tough since the core of his complaint is Sessions' recusal, which was certainly compelled by DOJ policy. So he resorts to criticizing Sessions' physical characteristics, his speech, his heritage. And in this case, it really has to shoot Trump in the foot Alabama still has, or at least had at the last polling, strong positives for the president, up in the 70th percentile.
That's what I thought.
We'll have to see if Alabama voters will sit down for this.
John, your thoughts about this? This guy is an equal opportunity character assassin. He's going around abandoning these people. You know, low IQ, Maxine Waters, low IQ.
Right, I mean,
keep going. And now he's got dumb Southerner.
Can you stop saying it that way?
Well, I'm saying
personal.
He seems to like it. I mean, he calls him that, you know?
Yeah, no, look, I think he tries to make himself feel better by trashing other people personally, likes to call other people dumb. I think he's insecure about his own intellect. And we have heard him before use the term mentally retarded to describe people repeatedly on the Howard Stern show. So when he says he's never called anybody that, it's just a lie.
Yeah.
The dumb Southerner thing, I agree that this isn't good for him with his base. I mean, he had to deny that. If the folks out there thought he was calling them dumb Southerners, it would pretty much poke a hole in the entire populist idea that he has been trying to sell for the last 2 years.
I think the movie was called Facing the Crowd. And it was about a guy that made fun of his own supporters out there. Michael Schmidt, is this going to, you've often smiled at me like you are now, about the fact that the ability of reporters for major newspapers to get good stories out of this White House. Will this encourage or discourage honesty coming from the sources?
Well, if
this article today,
if they think there's a leak hunt, which there's been several different times, maybe they'd be more concerned about that. But on the other hand, they may see the president as more vulnerable at this point. Maybe this is something that tips some Republicans. This all comes down to his Republican support. Yeah. And if they start to see that move, do they think, okay, well, maybe if we are more candid and more helpful, could we do something here? Is he more vulnerable? That's the thing.
I wonder how Lindsey Graham likes the phrase dumb Southerner. Anyway, thank you, Michael Schmidt. Thank you, Jonathan Allen, Zerlina Maxwell. You were enjoying yourself tonight. Zerlina, thank you for coming on this big night. I mean it. A big night. Thank you, Joyce, for your analysis. More on the president's response to that anonymous opinion piece. Well, I don't think it's going to stay anonymous for long. It's in the New York Times. We're going to find out. We're going to do vocabulary assessment. We're going to know who uses the word lodestar as one of their common words. We're going to figure this out. Look out, Mike Pence. This is Hardball, where the action is.
There's an anonymous op-ed from the New York Times that says, I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration. Just posted. No reaction.
Sheriffs, can you imagine it? We have somebody in what I call the failing New York Times that's talking about he's part of the resistance within the Trump administration.
This person works for the administration, they say.
And, the dishonest media, because you people deal with it as well as I do. But it's really a disgrace.
Welcome back to Hardball. That was, of course, President late today, the president, moments after the bombshell opinion piece dropped in the New York Times, which will run tomorrow. Joining me right now with the very latest, that is NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson. I've been waiting to hear what you know, because you know everything that's happening right now. I mean that, right now. You're the king of that.
Latest.
Is the White House going to have an internal investigation? They must be wondering, using the vocabulary notes. Yes. You can figure out who writes something. If you go through a study of the vocabulary, you can figure it out. Go ahead, your thoughts.
Okay, so a couple things here, Chris. Let me tell you first, your first question. What do we know right now? I will tell you this. There are people close to the president and the White House telling myself, my colleagues Kristen Welker, Peter Alexander, the president's mood is volcanic, to use their description of the words. He is exploding at this, furious, not just about the op-ed itself, the contents of it, but that it would be published in the New York Times, a paper he both despises and yet at times yearns to be in when he calls reporters in to be able to talk to them, that it was published anonymously in the Times. Now, let's be clear. Anonymous to us, but not to the heads of the op-ed pages in the Times. They know who this person is. They're just not telling everybody else because they say the senior administration official would then jeopardize this person's job if they were, in fact, to be revealed publicly. As for this, so that's what we know is going on. We know that the president is bothered by this because he called this gutless. He said it himself publicly inside the East Room just after this news broke. As to the second part of your question, the idea of the speculation, boy, that is the game of the moment here, Chris. I was walking up walking up the driveway to come on the air to talk with you, and somebody shouted, "Hallie, who do you think it is?" That is the question of the moment. And again, there is a lot of like, okay, linking this word to this person, and can we do this? Keep in mind, this is an administration where officials inside this West Wing and in the administration have routinely tried to throw people off the scent, right, to cover their tracks by planting different words or phrases or ideas in order to misdirect, essentially. So it is full of intrigue.
Okay,
it is
Hallie,
explosive.
you know the trade craft of your business as well as anybody around. The term senior administration official is not a BS term. It's not somebody. It's not one of the guards at the gate. It's not somebody who reports to. It's probably somebody who reports to a cabinet official or to the president, pretty high up. That's senior official.
That's a key word you just said, though, probably, Chris. And here's the thing. Every news organization, just to pull back the curtain, defines senior administration official a little bit differently. We have asked the New York Times, how do they define senior administration official? Senior, what does that mean? Is it somebody who, as in some organizations, does senior mean somebody who talks directly to the president? Does senior refer to a title in a certain area? The New York Times is not responding to that question from us, but they are describing this person as somebody who is, in their words, senior, Chris.
But if it comes out that it's not a senior official, and it will come out at some point, that it's not, they'll look stupid. So I don't think the Times, which has a lot riding on this, would call somebody a senior administration official if they didn't mean it. Because we all know what that means. It's somebody important. Somebody we may not know their name, but we damn well know what their job is, like speechwriter for the vice president, for example. Somebody knows how to write an op-ed piece. Somebody knows how to file with James Bennett in the op-ed page of the New York Times, knows how to do it without the help of a secretary or a staffer or any kind of help. It's somebody who can do it by themselves, because who would risk bringing in a posse to do something like this? That's my thinking. Yours?
Can I go back to something that I was saying earlier that relates to the point that you're just making, Chris, which is while there is a lot of intrigue about who did this, how did this come out, there is also a lot of concern about the actual content of this reporting, Chris, that backs up in many ways Bob Woodward's reporting in that book that has now been released that talks about officials in this administration steering this president away from some of his worst impulses, as it's been described. It is a direct link.
We have connected it in history to George Kennan's telegram, which was about containment. But in this case, it's not the containment of a foreign power like the Soviet Union or the communist threat internationally. It's about the threat of the chief executive of this country. Thank you, Hallie Jackson. Great reporting. Up next, more on that bombshell New York Times op-ed. You're watching it. Hardball. Wow. Welcome back to Hard. We're getting a stunning look, of course, at how the administration officials view the man they work for. Have you noticed? In that anonymous New York Times op-ed that will run tomorrow, a Trump senior official writes, the root of the problem is the president's amorality. Anyone who works with him knows he is not moored to any discernible first principles that guide his decision-making. Well, the author describes the daily disbelief of senior officials at Trump's comments and actions, writing, meetings with him veer off topic and off the rails. He engages in repetitive rants, and his impulsiveness results in half-baked, ill-informed, and occasionally reckless decisions that have to be walked back. Well, let's bring in tonight's roundtable. Nina Kumar, White House correspondent from McClatchy, P.J. O'Rourke, the author of None of Your Business, and David Korn, Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones. David, I want you to start this thing. The message. What do you get to the message? Because I wonder, when you read today in the afternoon, somebody comes running in at 4 o'clock today. Somebody inside the White House has verified everything that Bob Woodward's written, everything that Omarosa said, everything that Michael Wolff said, everything the worst critics of the president believe, that he's basically being treated as child care. There are people around him keeping him from hurting himself.
Well, the question is, why are we surprised? I mean, we've seen this behavior from Donald Trump, not just for the presidency, not just for the campaign, but for years. Bullying, insulting behavior, not being able to finish a sentence, let alone a paragraph, not being able to have a clear thought. We saw this during the debates.
The palace guard is now talking.
Well, now they're talking, and they have been talking, and we had Bob Woodward's book, and I think really, I agree with what Steve Schmidt said, that we cried a cur at the beginning of the show. It's time for these people to come forward. If indeed the president matches this description that I believe and I've seen and that we see described in this piece, the public must be told, not anonymously. You don't get points later, say, oh, I wrote an anonymous piece. But really, people have to come forward and say, this is the situation at hand. The public needs to know. They need to know when they vote. They need to know when they decide what to do about this.
Should this person come public?
Yes. And, my guess is, I bet 50-50 that within a week, we will know who the person is. And the next op-ed will be, I am the senior administration official.
Well, it took a long time.
Comes after that.
Remember Primary Colors, PJ, by Joe Klein?
Absolutely.
I mean, he denied it to me, he denied it to everybody on the planet.
Everything moves faster now.
Okay, now it's out. Let me ask you, what's this message said to you that some side, this is like the Caine Mutiny. Somebody's saying Captain Queeg's a little nuts.
Remember how the Caine Mutiny turned out. Like, the Caine Mutiny failed. And this is another kind of failure here. I mean, well, I think that whatever Anonymous said here is probably about 99% true, maybe even 105% true. It's also 100% ego. I just wonder how many people and how many presidential administrations, my guess would be lots in all, who have felt, if it weren't for me, if it weren't for wonderful me, the president would go right over the edge. And this is another example.
I never felt like that. I worked there. Anyway, the president just tweeted again. Does the so-called senior administration official really exist, or is it just the failing New York Times with another phony source? If the gutless anonymous person does exist, the Times must, for national security purposes, turn him over. The government, imagine turn him over. Anita, you're the straight reporter here. What's going on?
Well, I heard Hallie say earlier, they're upset. The president.
Are they going to catch this person?
Well, I hear that they are looking to figure out who it is. You saw what Sarah Huckabee Sanders said earlier, is this person should resign. I think they're out looking for this person. They're very upset.
What are the fingerprints?
What are the fingerprints?
No, really.
People are looking and looking at all sorts of language. Someone told me earlier that works for the administration that, if you look at some of this, free minds, free markets, we were talking about it seems more libertarian than conservative. There are a good number of libertarian as opposed to traditional conservatives in the administration. But they're going to look around, and
Club for Growth. Club for Growth. Right? That's the big libertarian.
And they also they can look at their emails, their phone records. They have, people coming and going. You talk about the deep state. If Trump wants to use the deep state to find the whereabouts,
we don't call it the deep state anymore. Now we call it the steady state.
Okay, is it possible that somebody would write a letter for the New York Times to attack the White House they work for, or the administration they work for, and keep it secret from everybody at work? That's what we're talking about here. Somebody who didn't tell their secretary, their boss, didn't tell anybody.
What they didn't keep it secret from was their book agent.
Yeah.
Here's the thing.
I agree with the book contract comes next, followed by the miniseries.
But I do think
this is going to be a very rich anonymous.
Hey, what did Nixon do? Nixon created the plumbers to stop the leaks, to find the leaks, and that led to Watergate.
Yeah, I know.
Let's just go back.
They're going to be doing things like that. They can do that.
But that said, this is, by my count, this is the 645th thing to bring down the Trump presidency.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, if you
some of the
reporting here is that the New York Times actually got this a few days ago, so it was before the Woodward stuff came out. It's just very bad timing that here it is. The Woodward stuff came out yesterday, and it basically is the next day. It's reiterating a lot of the stuff. So that's what's angry. It's a 1-2 punch. It's also the week that they're trying to show this Kavanaugh confirmation hearing. They feel like they have this. It's a good thing for them, and nobody's talking about it because I
think one of the other networks, I think Fox, is trying to keep the focus on Kavanaugh, but I don't think it's going to succeed.
But look at the tweet that just came out. Think about it. Again, we keep forgetting how outrageous this all is. He just called on the New York Times to turn over to the government, as if they're going to put them in handcuffs and throw them out in a cart. A source of theirs, someone who wrote a piece for them. This is an autocratic impulse. It's not saying we're going to look for the guy and fire him. It goes far beyond even what Nixon dreamed of.
He said two different things, guys. He said they made it up, they wrote it themselves, and we better turn the guy over. So which is it?
Yes.
Anita, I want to go back to the reporting section. Anita, is the White House going to go on a chase to try to find out who did this?
Well, it's just started, so they haven't announced any official action. But sure, they're asking around and trying to figure it out. Is Sarah
Huckabee Sanders the smart person on this? Who would be the smartest at spooking out this thing and figuring out who did it?
Well, here's the thing. We keep
She's trying to figure it out.
You mentioned earlier senior administration official could mean so many things. It doesn't have to be someone in the executive office of the White House. This could be someone in one of the agencies or departments. Cabinet secretaries, deputy secretaries, that's a senior administration
official.
And
you think the Times would give credit to that person as a senior administration?
Hey, we're reporters. Anytime we have a source,
That's high up.
it becomes a senior,
Well, I don't agree with that.
official.
Ben Bradley would not allow that to happen. I saw the movie. The roundtable is staying with us, and up next, these three will tell me something I don't know. Senior means senior. You're watching Hardball. We're back with the roundtable. Anita, tell me something I don't know.
Last week, President Trump announced the trade deal with Mexico. But what he didn't tell you is that in that trade deal, he has agreed to allow the same number of high-skilled workers from Mexico to come to the United States. So this is a president who campaigned that he wanted to cut legal immigration, illegal immigration, but he suffered a political loss by allowing these same visas in there.
P.J. O'Rourke.
The Democrats are deliberately throwing the fight for Kavanaugh. They are virtue signaling to all the angry progressives out there who they're afraid are going to throw them out of office. And they want to, in Marxist terms, heighten the contradictions. They want the situation to get worse so that they can put themselves in power. They're tossing it.
Throwing the game.
Throwing the game.
David.
I don't know about that, but Roger Stone is not testifying to a grand jury this week, but two people associated with him are, and he already expects to be indicted. I think there's a lot still to come out about what he knew and what he said he knew before the election about the Russian attack.
What a trial that's going to be. Thank you, Anita Kumar, P.J. O'Rourke, and David Corn. When we return, let me finish tonight with Trump Watch. It's a wild one tonight. Stick around. You're watching Hardball. Trump Watch, Wednesday, September 5th, 2018. It strikes me that the better look we get into the presidential world of Donald Trump, the more we need to worry. I say that because as the months of 2018 have dropped from the calendar, so has the veil that has draped the day-to-day world at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The evidence of a worst-case scenario now grows. Life inside those White House gates is as wacky as the most frightened of us had imagined. Recall your own reaction when Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, arrived this January, depicting the chaos driving the West Wing and questioning the president's very fitness to manage his office. Then came an expose from someone who rode the celebrity status at Trump's bidding, who described life around the president as unhinged. And this week, we got Watergate sleuth Bob Woodward's reporting, which all the president's huffing and puffing is not likely to blow down. In it, we read once again of what we learned elsewhere. Most frightfully, the dawn to midnight effort of White House staffers to protect this country, not from foreign forces, but from the president himself. And now on September 5th, 2018, comes the most piercing news about the man who sits in Lincoln's chair. It is the witness of a senior administration official who has penned an anonymous op-ed piece for the New York Times that lays the entire horror story bare, of how senior officials in Trump's administration come to work each morning determined to frustrate Trump's own worst inclinations. That's right, to save us from him. Of a president who is today acting in a manner detrimental to the health of the country, a president who lacks the basic morality to even lead the country. And this is where we stand right now. As we've come closer and closer to seeing the brain and belly of this administration, we've come upon what Donald Trump has wrought. An American government forged of resentment, driven by a childlike hunger for attention, ignorant of important American history, incompetently and meanly led, bereft of those values that, at our best, have taken us forward.
Scams, sex, even murder, committed for money. I'm Stacey Keach, the voice of CNBC's crime series American Greed. Subscribe to the American Greed podcast. Shocking cases, all true. Some people will do anything for money.